Hi there, hello. I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Machiavelli's Discourse. Today, we're continuing our examination of Book 2 of the Discourses, looking today at Chapter 20. And the Chapter 20 continues the theme of what danger that the prince or republic runs that avails itself of auxiliary or mercenary military. Now, this chapter will very much echo what he said earlier in another chapter of The Prince on this question of mercenary and auxiliary arms. I think it's chapter 12 and chapter 13. 12 he did with mercenary arms and criticism of mercenary arms, and then 13 on auxiliary mixed and one's own arms, right? And this is his discussion of this. Now, he goes, if I had not treated at length in another work of mine, and of course this is Prince 12 and 13, right? How useless mercenaries or auxiliaries is, and how useful one's own is, I would extend myself in this discourse much more than I do. So in other words, he's saying, I've dealt with this in the Prince. And therefore, if I didn't deal with it, this would be a lot longer chapter than it is. But since I've spoken of it at length elsewhere, I will be brief in this part. So he's going to be brief, he says, right? This is him being brief. Nor has it seemed to me that I should pass it by either. And I was quiet about it, since I found in Titus Livy such extensive examples as to auxiliary soldiers. In other words, Titus Livy gives lots of examples of auxiliary. This is allies, right? Auxiliaries are allies, outside forces of other people. For auxiliary soldiers are those whom a prince or republic send, captained or paid by it. In other words, for your aid. In other words, other people it's either their own army or an army that is they paid for to come help you. Okay, so it can be either a force that is their own or something that they're paying. And he says, and he gives many examples. Coming to the text of Livy, I say that when the Romans, with their armies, which they had sent for the relief of the Caputans, had defeated two armies of the Samnites in two different places, and thereby freed the Caputans from the war of the Samnites made against them, and they wished to return to Rome. They left 2 legions in the country of the Caputa to defend the Caputans, so they would not be despoiled. They would not be despoiled of a garrison and become prey anew to the Samnites. Right? This is Livy 7, 32, 33, and 37. Right? These legions, rotting in idleness, began to take delight in it. So much so that, having forgotten about their fatherland and their reverence for the Senate, they thought about taking up arms and making themselves lord of the country that they have defended with their virtue. In other words, they've lost their times of this. They've forgotten their fatherland and reverence for the Senate. And they thought about taking up arms for themselves and putting themselves in charge. For it appeared to them that the inhabitants were not worthy of possessing these goods, and they did not know how to defend it. In other words, they can't defend it themselves. This is how a lot of American soldiers felt about Afghanistan, still to this day, and Iraq. That why are we fighting for these people? They're not able. My God, the Afghans ran away. You go listen to the stories of veterans, American combat veterans, and people like this about their experiences in Iraq, and they have nothing but contempt for. They see some people that are worthy But for the people at large, they have nothing but contempt for them. Why? Because they look at them. Look, they weren't. The Afghan army wasn't able to fight for itself. Oh, because they were they weren't really theirs, or they were ours. In other words, no. It was that the Americans looked at this, and if it wasn't, if those places were really valuable, that would be the idea here is that it would have been another question. Well, this is why this is. In other words, for it appeared to them that the inhabitants were not worthy of possessing these goods that they did not know how to defend. Having foreseen this thing, the Romans crushed it and corrected it. Again, this is Livy 7:38 and 39. They foresee that this would happen, and as will be shown extensively where I speak of conspiracies, right? In Discourses 3:6, chapter 6. You'll talk about this again when he talks about conspiracies, which is going to be a long chapter, if I remember correctly. I therefore say anew that of all other kinds of soldiers, auxiliaries are the most harmful. For the prince or the republic who puts them to work in their aid does not have any authority over them, and he who sends them has authority. Who sends them alone has authority there. In other words, that the soldiers are not theirs. Locals, they come and they're going to be. These are the most dangerous because they're really in charge. The person who sends them has control. You don't. For soldiers, there are those who are sent by a prince, as I have said, under his captains, under his designation, and paid by him, as was the army of the Romans sent to Caputa. Such soldiers, when they have conquered, usually prey as much on him who had led them, as on him against whom they are led, right? In other words, they do so either through the malignity of the prince who send them, or through their own ambition, right? The prince didn't care, the malignity of the I don't care about it, you can go do it, I'm not going to refund it, and therefore that's the danger of it. That's the malignity of the prince or the ambitions of their own soldiers, right? The soldiers themselves. Through the invention of the Romans, although the intention of the Romans was not to break the accord and the conventions they had made with the Caputans, nevertheless, the ease with which these soldiers could crush them seemed so great that it could persuade them to think of taking from the Capuchins their towns and their state. In other words, very many examples of this could be given, but I wish this to be enough. And also that of the Reginae, whose life and town was taken away by a legion, and that the Romans had put there as a guard. Again, this is like example of this. 5, the inhabitants of Polybius 1, Livy 28, or Livy 31. In other words, the Romans put a place of guard, and eventually the legion that was there decided to take over the thing. Right? And a prince or republic should then take up any other policy rather than having recourses to leading auxiliary troops into his state for his defense, if he has to trust altogether in them. For any pact, any convention, however hard, that he has with the enemy will be lighter for him than such a policy. In other words, get into an agreement with your enemy, make a deal. In other words, because however hard and that he has with his enemy will be lighter than the cost of the policy of relying on auxiliary troops. If past things are read well and those of the present are reviewed, it will be found that for one who has had a good end from this, infinite ones were left deceived by it. So even though there's a one prince, and he talks about the prince in question is called Cesare Borgia, right? Would be Cesare. His example. This even if there's one example, there's a modern example of a prince was one, but there's more examples of people ruined by this, right? Deceived by it. A prince or his ambitious republic cannot have a great opportunity for seizing a city or a province than to be asked to send his armies to its defense. Right? In other words, this is an ambitious prince or this will have no other great opportunity. In other words, opportunity. Therefore, he who is so ambitious that he calls in such aid does not defend himself, but to take the offense against others, seek to acquire that which he cannot hold, and which can be easily taken away from him by him who acquires it for him. In other words, here's a danger. If I want this, but I can't do it myself. I have to have other people come and do it for me. The people who do it for you will take it away from you. Okay, that you depend on whether it's. But so great is the ambition of man that to obtain a present wish, he does not think of the evil that in a brief time will result from it. In other words, he doesn't think of the negative consequences. I have a want, I have a desire. I only think of the thing I want, the benefit, the good I want. It doesn't look at the costs, or even the short, long-term costs. He thinks of the immediate good I get from it, or my perceived benefit from it, but not pays attention to the costs or the negative externalities, right? That result from it, the evils that in a brief time to result from it. Nor in this, as the other things discoursed of, do the ancient examples move him. They don't believe in the ancient examples. For if they, again, he moves from the shift from the singular to the plural. I'm talking about the singular one, the ruler, to they, right? Were moved by them. They would see them more liberally they would see the more liberality is shown towards neighbors and the more aversion to seizing them. The more they fling themselves into the laps, as it would be said below, through the examples of the Capuchin. In other words, the more in other words, one would, if they paid attention. In other words, he's saying the ambition of men they think of only the present wish, not the things. That's one thing, and they lack faith in the examples. In other words, as we have discoursed, the ancient examples don't have faith in them. They don't believe them. They no longer believe in the ancient examples. Because if they were moved by them, they would see that the more liberality is shown towards neighbors, the more aversion to seizing them, the more they fling themselves into the lap of the other side, right? The Capuchin example in that sense. So we'll stop here. We will, if you have any comments or questions, please put them below. If you like it, hit the like button. Put comments and questions below, and I will respond to them when I see them. Hit the like button. Hit like it. If you've not subscribed, consider subscribing. Encourage others to come check the channel out. To that end, share it. Share the video. Share it on your social media. Share it far and wide. Share it to your friends. Again, encourage your friends to go check the channel out and come look at what we do and maybe even subscribe. Another thing you can do is, of course, so like, sharing, commenting, liking, sharing, subscribing all helps the algorithm, so people searching will come to. So please do these things. Another thing you can do is if you didn't like it, you can always thumbs down it, but say why in the comments so people can benefit. Another thing you do is you want to follow me on social media. The social media links are below. If you want to know more about me as a scholar and as a researcher and check out my academic work and things like that, you can do so to the academic social media links below the social media links. And if you want to know more, you want to help me to do what I do, you through Patreon. Subsidizing. You can do so through Patreon or Subscribestar. The links there below, or you can buy one of my books. My books that are currently available. The list of the books are there, and you can order them either directly. If you look at a bookstore that has them, yes, or through an internet distributor like Barnes and Nobles and a Libris, Amazon, whatever, or through the publishers themselves. And there's both, and also the ebooks. The ebooks should be available. There's one ebook, specifically made ebook, but there's one or two of the other books are available ebook, and they should be available on Kindle or other platforms as well. I think the pure ebook should be available on the Apple as well. So again, please go check these things out and buy one of these things to help. That helped. That's it. We turn next to chapter 21. Take care and have a great day. Bye-bye.